My name is Tori Thatcher, and I'm 32 years old. 5 years ago, my mother called me 3 days before Thanksgiving and said 7 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. Don't come home this year. Victoria doesn't want drama. No explanation, no apology, just a door slammed shut on 27 years of trying to belong. I spent that Thanksgiving alone at a restaurant in Boston, watching happy families laugh together while I fought back tears over a cold turkey dinner. I had no idea that the strangers at the next table would become the family I'd always dreamed of. I had no idea that 5 years later, they'd be introduced at my wedding as the parents of the bride, while my biological parents stood watching uninvited, realizing they'd been replaced in every way that matters. Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if this story resonates with you. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Let me take you back to the phone call that changed everything. I remember exactly where I was standing when my phone rang. November 21st, 3 days before Thanksgiving. I was in my tiny studio apartment in Boston, surrounded by half-packed bags and the scent of the pumpkin candle I'd lit to get myself in the holiday spirit. I'd already bought my plane ticket home to Connecticut. Non-refundable, of course. Mom's name flashed on my screen. I smiled and picked up. "Hey, Mom. I was just about to—" "Tori." Her voice was flat, cold. "I need to tell you something." My stomach dropped. That tone never meant anything good. "What's wrong? Is Dad okay?" "Your father's fine." A pause. "Listen, I've been thinking, and don't come home this year." I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. "What do you mean?" "Victoria doesn't want drama. She's pregnant again, and she doesn't need the stress." I gripped the phone tighter. "Drama? What drama? I haven't even talked to Victoria in months." "Exactly." Mom's voice hardened. "And let's keep it that way. You know how you get." "How I get?" My voice cracked. "Mom, I literally just asked her last year why she didn't invite me to her baby shower. That's not drama. That's a question." "See? That's exactly what I mean. You always make everything about you." I stood there, frozen, watching the snow fall outside my window. 27 years old, and my mother was telling me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving because I'd once asked why I was excluded. "Mom, I already bought my ticket." "Then get a refund." Her tone left no room for negotiation. "Victoria is pregnant. She doesn't need stress. You understand." The line went dead. I understood perfectly. I'd always been the acceptable sacrifice. I wish I could say this was the first time. But as I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my useless plane ticket, the memories came flooding back like a highlight reel of disappointment. My 16th birthday party. I'd been planning it for months, a small gathering with my 3 closest friends. Mom promised we'd have cake and go bowling. But the morning of, Victoria called crying because she'd failed her calculus final and needed emotional support. My party was canceled. We spent the day consoling my sister instead. "Don't be dramatic, Tori. Your sister needs us more right now. You can celebrate next weekend." We never did. Then there was my college graduation. I'd worked so hard for that moment. 4 years of late nights and part-time jobs and scraping by on ramen. I was the first person in my family to graduate with honors. When I walked across that stage, I looked for my parents in the crowd. Their seats were empty. They showed up 2 hours late. Victoria had a routine prenatal checkup that couldn't be rescheduled. "You understand, sweetheart. Your sister's baby is more important than a ceremony. More important than me." That's what she meant. That's what she always meant. I learned early that complaining only made things worse. Don't be so sensitive. Stop making everything about yourself. Why can't you just be happy for your sister? So I stopped complaining. I became smaller, quieter. I thought if I was agreeable enough, easy enough, invisible enough, maybe then I'd finally earn their love. I was 27 years old, sitting in a cold apartment with a worthless plane ticket, and I finally realized the truth. There was no amount of small that would ever be small enough. I called my father. I don't know what I expected. Maybe some small part of me still believed he'd stand up for me, just this once. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. "Hey, kiddo." His voice was cautious. He already knew. "Dad, did Mom tell you?" A long pause. I could hear the TV in the background, probably a football game. "She mentioned it." "And you're okay with this? You don't think maybe I should be allowed at Thanksgiving with my own family?" Another pause, longer this time. "You know how your mother is, Tori. She's just trying to keep the peace." "By excluding me?" "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Dad? Tell me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're all choosing Victoria over me." Again, silence. I could hear him breathing. I could almost see him sitting in his recliner, rubbing his forehead the way he always did when he wanted to disappear from a conversation. "Dad, do you want me there?" 5 seconds passed. 10. I think... He cleared his throat. "I think it's better if you listen to your mother this year." Something inside me went quiet. Not sad, not angry, just empty. "Okay, Dad." "Tori, don't be like..." I said, "Okay." I hung up. He didn't call back. I sat in my apartment as the sun went down, watching the shadows stretch across my floor. My father had a chance to choose me, to say one word in my defense, and he chose silence instead. He was always in the middle, I realized. He just always chose to stand on their side. But as the darkness settled in, something else settled too. A quiet decision. If I wasn't welcome at their table, I'd make my own Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving Day arrived gray and cold. I woke up in my studio apartment to the sound of my neighbor's family arriving. Footsteps overhead, children laughing, the muffled warmth of voices I couldn't make out. The smell of something delicious drifted through the vents. Someone was making stuffing. I made instant coffee and sat by the window, watching the snow fall on the empty street below. My phone stayed silent all morning. No calls, no texts, not even a happy Thanksgiving from anyone in my family. Around noon, I made the mistake of opening Instagram. Victoria had posted a photo. The whole family around the dining table, Mom, Dad, Victoria, her husband Brad, their 2-year-old son in a tiny turkey sweater. Everyone was smiling. The caption read, "So grateful for my family. These are the people who matter most." I zoomed in on the photo, counted the place settings. 4 adults, 1 toddler, 5 chairs. There wasn't even an empty seat where I should have been. They hadn't just excluded me. They'd erased me, like I'd never existed at all. I closed the app, stared at the ceiling. I thought about ordering delivery and spending the day in bed. That's what I deserved, right? A sad meal alone in my dark apartment, feeling sorry for myself. That's what the dramatic daughter gets. But something in me refused. No, I wasn't going to sit here and let them win. I wasn't going to let their rejection turn me into exactly what they accused me of being, a sad, bitter, dramatic mess. I grabbed my coat. If I was going to eat Thanksgiving dinner alone, I was going to do it somewhere with actual food, with light, with life. I just had to find a restaurant that was still open. Harborview Grill was one of those old Boston institutions, dark wood, brass fixtures, the kind of place that still had cloth napkins and candles on every table. More importantly, it was one of the few restaurants in the city that stayed open on Thanksgiving. When I pushed through the door, the warmth hit me like a wave. The smell of roasted turkey and fresh bread, the soft clink of glasses, and everywhere, families. Couples with grandparents, parents with children, groups of friends who laughed like they'd known each other forever. The restaurant hummed with the sound of people who belonged somewhere. The hostess looked at me with barely concealed pity. "Just one tonight?" "Just one." She led me to a tiny two-top in the corner, squeezed between the kitchen door and a large family that took up 3 tables pushed together. I could have touched their chairs if I reached out. "Your server will be right with you." I sat down, opened the menu, tried to look like this was a choice. The family next to me was celebrating hard, An older couple at the head of the table, probably in their late 60s, a middle-aged man with his wife and 2 kids, and a younger man around 30 who kept making everyone laugh. 3 generations, easy. They passed dishes back and forth without asking. They interrupted each other in the way that only people who truly love each other can. I watched them out of the corner of my eye and felt something crack open in my chest. This is what family is supposed to look like. The server arrived with a bread basket and a tight smile. The Thanksgiving special? Please. I was going to get through this dinner. I was going to be fine. I wasn't fine. My turkey arrived. Golden skin, cranberry sauce, a perfect scoop of mashed potatoes. It looked like a magazine photo. I couldn't taste any of it. I sat there pushing food around my plate, trying not to look at the family beside me, trying not to think about my own family gathered around their table in Connecticut, laughing and passing the gravy without a single thought about the daughter they'd discarded. And suddenly I understood something I'd been avoiding for 27 years. This wasn't about Thanksgiving. This wasn't about Victoria's pregnancy or Mom's need for peace. This was about a pattern so deep it had shaped my entire life. I had spent 27 years trying to earn a place at their table, bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes, swallowing my hurt, apologizing for having feelings, staying quiet when I should have spoken, speaking up only to be told I was too much. And what had it gotten me? A corner table, a meal alone, an Instagram photo with no empty chair. If I kept going like this, if I kept trying to be small enough, quiet enough, agreeable enough, what would I have left? At some point, there'd be nothing left to shrink. The tears came before I could stop them. I turned my face toward the window, hoping no one would notice. I grabbed my napkin and pressed it to my eyes, trying to be invisible, trying to disappear like I always did. Honey? I froze. A woman's voice, warm, concerned. Are you okay? I looked up. The older woman from the family next to me was standing beside my table. Silver hair, kind eyes, a face that somehow looked like it had spent a lifetime actually listening to people. She was looking at me like I mattered. I'm fine, I said automatically. Just allergies. The woman raised one eyebrow, not judging, just knowing. Allergies don't usually make people cry into their napkin on Thanksgiving. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. That obvious? Only to someone who's paying attention. She had a gentle voice, but there was steel underneath, the kind of woman who'd seen things. I'm Eleanor. Tori. Well, Tori. She glanced back at her family, then at me. No one should eat alone on this day. Why don't you come join us? I shook my head immediately. Oh no, I couldn't. I don't want to intrude. You're not intruding. I'm inviting. She smiled. There's a difference. I really appreciate it, but my husband tells terrible jokes, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. And my son Marcus keeps trying to start political debates. You might as well come suffer with us. From the big table, the older man, her husband, I assumed, waved at me. She won't take no for an answer. Trust me. 43 years, and I've never won an argument. The younger son, Marcus apparently, grinned. He's not wrong. I looked at my cold turkey, my empty table, my napkin still damp with tears. Then I looked at Eleanor Morrison and her warm eyes and her family that somehow had room for a stranger. Okay, I heard myself say. If you're sure I'm not... I'm sure. Eleanor put her hand on my shoulder. Come on. We just opened another bottle of wine, and there's way too much pie. I stood up on shaky legs and followed her to the table, not knowing that this single moment, this small act of kindness from a woman I'd never met, was about to change the entire trajectory of my life. They made room for me like I'd always been there. Someone pulled up a chair. Someone else handed me a plate. Before I could even sit down, I had a glass of wine in my hand and a warm roll on my plate. I'm Richard, the older man said, shaking my hand firmly. This is my wife Eleanor. Our son Daniel and his wife Sarah, their kids Emma and Lucas, and our youngest Marcus. Hi. I gave an awkward little wave to the table. I'm Tori. Thank you so much for— What do you do, Tori? Daniel asked, passing me the mashed potatoes. I'm a graphic designer, freelance mostly. That's wonderful, Sarah said. I can barely draw a stick figure. Mom, stick figures are easy, Emma said. She looked about 8. Even I can do that. Everyone laughed. Not at anyone, with each other. It was such a foreign sound. Marcus caught my eye from across the table. He was around my age, maybe a little older, with dark hair and an easy smile. Fair warning, my dad's about to tell a joke. I am not, Richard protested. He is, Eleanor said. Richard grinned. Okay, fine. What did the turkey say to the computer? Dad, no, Daniel groaned. Google, Google, Google. The kids burst into giggles. Sarah rolled her eyes. Marcus shook his head. And I actually laughed. A real laugh. For the first time all day. Richard raised his wine glass. A toast to unexpected guests who make our table complete. Everyone raised their glasses, including me. I looked around at these people, strangers, all of them, until 15 minutes ago, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Warmth, acceptance, belonging. I didn't know families could feel like this. After the main course, while the kids ran off to explore the restaurant and the men argued about football, Eleanor moved to the chair next to mine. How are you doing? She asked quietly. Really? I looked down at my plate. Better. This is really nice. Thank you. You're welcome. She took a sip of her wine. But that's not what I asked. Something about her directness made me want to be honest. I'm okay. I'm just having a hard Thanksgiving. Do you want to tell me why you're really here alone? I hesitated. The truth felt too pathetic to say out loud. My own mother told me not to come home. My sister thinks I'm drama. My father chose silence over me. But Eleanor waited, patient, no judgment in her eyes. My mom called me 3 days ago, I finally said. Told me not to come home for Thanksgiving. My sister is pregnant and she didn't want drama. Drama? That's what they call it when I ask questions they don't want to answer. Eleanor nodded slowly. I see. It's fine, I added quickly. I mean, it's not fine, but it's not fine. Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. Can I tell you something I learned in 30 years as a family lawyer? I blinked. You're a lawyer? Retired. Family law, she smiled. I've seen every kind of family dysfunction you can imagine, and I've learned that the people who accuse you of causing drama are usually the ones creating it. They just need someone to blame. The words hit me like a physical force. You're not the problem, Tori. Eleanor put her hand over mine. You never were. I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. Those were the words I'd needed to hear my entire life. Hey, I want to pause here for a second. If you're watching this and you've ever been blamed for causing drama just because you asked to be treated fairly, I see you. I want to know, have you ever been made the scapegoat in your family? Type your answer in the comments. And if this story is hitting close to home, please hit that like button so more people can find it. Now let me tell you what happened next. The evening wound down slowly, the way good dinners do. Pie was served, coffee was poured. The kids fell asleep on Sarah's lap, exhausted from running circles around the restaurant. When the check came, I reached for my wallet, but Richard waved me off. Please, he said, our treat. I can't let you. You can and you will. He smiled. Consider it a Thanksgiving tradition. We always buy dinner for new friends. As we gathered our coats and prepared to leave, Eleanor pressed something into my hand. A small card, cream-colored, with elegant black text. I looked down. Eleanor Morrison, J.D., Family Law, retired. Below that, a phone number and an address in Brookline. If you ever need to talk, she said, call me, I mean it. Thank you. Richard appeared beside us, shrugging on his coat. Sunday dinners, every week at our place. You're welcome any time. I shook my head. That's so kind, but I couldn't. She could, Marcus said, joining the group. And she should. Mom never says things she doesn't mean. Trust me. Eleanor squeezed my hand. Family isn't blood, Tori. It's showing up. I stood there in the restaurant lobby, holding a business card from a woman I'd met 3 hours ago, receiving an open invitation from a family I had no claim to. Outside, the snow was falling harder. Through the window I could see families hurrying to their cars, children carried on shoulders, grandparents clutching to-go containers of leftover pie. I looked back at the Morrisons, Richard helping Eleanor with her scarf, Daniel herding sleepy children, Marcus waiting by the door with an expectant look. Okay, I said. Maybe I'll stop by sometime. Eleanor smiled like she'd known I'd say yes all along. I had no idea I'd just met my future family. I didn't go to Sunday dinner the next week, or the week after that. It felt too strange, too forward, too much like I was imposing on someone else's family. But Eleanor called. Just to check in, she said, just to see how I was doing. By early December, I finally accepted the invitation. That first Sunday, I stood on the Morrisons' porch in Brookline for 5 full minutes before I worked up the courage to knock. The house was exactly what I'd imagined, a beautiful Victorian with a wraparound porch and lights in every window. It looked like the kind of place where good things happened. Eleanor opened the door before I could change my mind. There you are. She pulled me into a hug like it was the most natural thing in the world. We saved you a seat. That was the first of many Sundays. Over the next 6 months, I became a regular at the Morrison dinner table. Richard taught me to play chess, even though I lost every single game. Eleanor showed me her secret pie crust recipe, the one she swore she'd never written down. Daniel's kids started calling me Aunt Tori without anyone telling them to. And Marcus? Marcus and I became friends. Real friends. The kind who texted random thoughts at 2 a.m. and argued about movies and sat next to each other at dinner without anyone having to arrange it. I didn't hear from my biological family once. Not a call, not a text, not even a Christmas card. For the first time in my life, I stopped noticing. Because for the first time, I wasn't performing for love. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit into someone else's expectations. I was just loved. It felt like finally coming home. One spring afternoon, about 8 months after that first Thanksgiving, Eleanor and I were sitting on her back porch. The garden was just starting to bloom, tulips pushing up through the soil, birds fighting over the feeder. Richard was inside, watching a game with Marcus. We could hear them shouting at the TV. Have you heard from your parents? Eleanor asked. I watched a robin land on the fence. No, and I haven't reached out either. She nodded, no judgment in her eyes. Do you want to? I thought about it, really thought about it. Sometimes, I admitted. In the middle of the night, mostly. I'll think about calling my mom and trying to explain, but then I remember there's nothing to explain. She knows what she did. She just doesn't think it was wrong. That's a hard thing to accept. It is. I pulled my cardigan tighter. I keep waiting to feel guilty. Everyone says you should forgive your family no matter what. Blood is thicker than water and all that. You know, I've never believed that. Eleanor took a sip of her tea. In my career, I helped a lot of people find legal recognition for the families they've built, not the ones they were born into. I turned to look at her. What do you mean? She smiled, soft and knowing. Just that the law recognizes what the heart already knows. That family can be created, not just inherited. There are ways to make those bonds official, if a person wants to. I didn't fully understand what she was hinting at. Not yet. Something to think about, Eleanor said. Whenever you're ready. She patted my hand and changed the subject to her tomato plants. But her words stayed with me. They would take root slowly and bloom at exactly the right time. It happened so naturally that I almost didn't notice it happening. 2 years after that first Thanksgiving, Marcus and I weren't just friends anymore. We were something more. something that had grown so gradually that when we finally acknowledged it, it felt less like a beginning and more like a recognition of what had always been there. He asked me to dinner at Harborview Grill, the same restaurant where we'd met. "This feels circular," I said, sliding into the booth. "That's the point." Marcus was nervous. I could tell by the way he kept adjusting his napkin. "I wanted to bring you back to where it all started." "Where what started?" He reached across the table and took my hand. "Tori, I've been trying to figure out how to say this for months." He took a breath. "I want to spend the rest of my life choosing you, every single day." My heart stopped. "Marcus? I know your family hurt you. I know you're scared of people who are supposed to love you letting you down." His eyes were steady on mine. "But I'm not going anywhere. I never have been." He pulled out a small velvet box. "Tori Thatcher, will you marry me?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I looked at this man who'd been my friend first, my confidant second, my rock through 2 years of healing, and I saw my future. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes." He slipped the ring on my finger. The restaurant erupted in applause. I'd been so focused on Marcus I hadn't even noticed the other diners watching. And then I saw them. In the corner booth, Richard and Eleanor, champagne already poured, beaming at us like they'd known all along. "Mom couldn't resist," Marcus laughed. I was going to officially become a Morrison. The wedding planning began immediately. Venue options, catering tastings, flower consultations. It was overwhelming and exciting and everything I'd never let myself dream about. But one question kept me up at night. The wedding invitations would need a line for parents of the bride. And I had no idea what to write there. Robert and Linda Thatcher? They hadn't spoken to me in over 2 years, hadn't called on my birthday, hadn't acknowledged my existence in any way. I couldn't put their names on my wedding invitation. They hadn't earned that honor. I was pacing in the Morrisons' living room one evening when Eleanor found me. "What's troubling you, sweetheart?" I told her about the invitation, about the impossible line I couldn't figure out how to fill. Eleanor sat down and patted the cushion beside her. "There's something I mentioned to you once, about legal recognition for chosen family. Do you remember?" I nodded slowly. "You said the law recognizes family that's created, not just inherited." "Adult adoption," Eleanor said gently. "It's a legal process where a consenting adult is formally adopted by another family. It creates a legal parent-child relationship, new birth certificate, new legal next-of-kin status, everything." My heart was pounding. That's a real thing?" "Very real. I've helped many people through the process." I looked at this woman who'd pulled me into her family on the loneliest night of my life, who'd fed me Sunday dinners and taught me about pie crust and shown me what a mother could be. "Eleanor," my voice cracked, "would you and Richard consider—" She pulled me into her arms before I could finish the sentence. "We've considered you our daughter since the first Thanksgiving," she whispered. "We were just waiting for you to be ready." The adoption process took several months: paperwork, court appearances, legal filings. But with Eleanor guiding me through every step, it felt less like bureaucracy and more like a ceremony. When the judge signed the final order, I legally became Tori Morrison. I had a new birth certificate, new legal parents, a new family, on paper and in my heart. The wedding was set for the following June. We sent out invitations with the line I'd agonized over, now proudly printed: "Parents of the bride, Richard and Eleanor Morrison." I should have known the Thatcher family would eventually find out. 3 months before the wedding, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria, the first message from her in nearly 3 years. "Did you know Tori's getting married?" I stared at the screen, then I blocked the number. A week later, my mother called, 5 times in one day. I let every call go to voicemail. Finally, a text. "Why didn't you tell us? We're your family, call me back immediately." I read it twice, then I deleted it. 3 years of silence. 3 years of pretending I didn't exist. And now suddenly they remembered they had another daughter. I wasn't angry. I'd moved past anger long ago. I was just tired. Marcus found me staring at my phone that evening. Everything okay? My biological family found out about the wedding. Ah. He sat down beside me. What do you want to do? Nothing. I put the phone away. I don't owe them anything. Not an explanation, not an invitation, nothing. He nodded and pulled me close. Whatever you decide, I support you. But we both knew this wasn't over. The Thatchers weren't the kind of family who accepted being ignored. The question was, what would they do about it? She showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home, reviewing design proofs at my kitchen table, when the doorbell rang. I opened it without checking the peephole, a mistake I wouldn't make again. Tori. My mother stood in my hallway. She looked older than I remembered, grayer, more tired, but her eyes held the same disappointed expression I'd spent my childhood trying to erase. Mom. The word felt foreign in my mouth. What are you doing here? What am I doing here? She pushed past me into the apartment without being invited. What are you doing, getting married without telling your own mother? We haven't spoken in 3 years. And whose fault is that? I closed the door slowly, counted to 5. Yours. It was your fault. You told me not to come home. Not to. That was one Thanksgiving. You can't still be upset about that. I'm not upset. I kept my voice calm. I've moved on. Linda's eyes swept across my living room, landing on the photos on my bookshelf. Me and Marcus at a beach. Me and Eleanor making pie. The whole Morrison family at Christmas. Me right in the center. Who are these people? My family. Her face contorted. I am your family. You were. I met her gaze evenly. You chose not to be. Remember? Victoria didn't want drama. That was years ago. And in those years, you never once called, never checked if I was alive, never acknowledged my existence. I felt eerily calm. So no, Mom, you don't get to show up now and act like you have a claim on me. I want an invitation to the wedding. No. Her jaw dropped. Excuse me? You heard me? I walked to the door and opened it. You don't get to erase me and then demand a seat at my table. The wedding day dawned golden and perfect. June in Napa Valley. A vineyard with rolling hills and endless rows of grapevines. We'd chosen an outdoor ceremony with a reception in a beautiful stone barn, everything decorated with white roses and greenery. In the bridal suite, I stood before a full-length mirror while Eleanor adjusted my veil. You look beautiful, she said softly. Absolutely beautiful. I looked at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was calmer, stronger than the girl who'd sat alone in a restaurant 5 years ago. That girl hadn't believed she deserved to be loved. This woman knew better. On the vanity beside me sat a copy of the wedding program. I picked it up, reading the line I'd never thought I'd be able to write. Parents of the bride, Richard and Eleanor Morrison. Underneath, in smaller text, the family who chose her. Eleanor noticed me looking. Are you nervous? About marrying Marcus? No. I set down the program. About what might happen, a little. I'd hired security for the wedding, a quiet precaution. After Mom's visit to my apartment, I knew there was a chance she'd try something. Eleanor put her hands on my shoulders. Whatever happens today, you have a family who chose you. We will always choose you. Never forget that. I hugged her tight. I love you, Mom. It was the first time I'd called her that. The word came out naturally, like it had always been waiting. Eleanor's eyes glistened. I love you too, sweetheart. My daughter. Through the window I could see guests arriving. Marcus was already at the altar looking nervous and handsome in his gray suit. It was time. Whatever came next, I was ready. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of. Marcus waiting at the end of the aisle. Richard walking me toward him, steady and proud. The vows we'd written ourselves, words that made half the guests cry and the other half pretend they weren't crying. When Marcus slipped the ring on my finger and the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, I felt something click into place, like the last piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve my entire life. The reception was in full swing when the security guard found me. "Mrs. Morrison?" He appeared at my elbow, discreet and professional. "There are two people at the entrance. They claim to be your parents." I'd expected this. Part of me had been waiting for it all day. Marcus appeared beside me. "What's going on?" "My biological parents are here." His expression hardened. "I'll handle it." "No." I took his hand. "This is my moment. I'll handle it." I considered my options. I could have them removed. I could pretend they weren't there. I could avoid the confrontation entirely. But something in me said no. Let them see. Let them see what they lost. Let them see the family who stepped up when they stepped away. Let them witness the life I built without them. "Let them in," I told the security guard. "But don't seat them with the family. Put them in the back." "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. "I'm sure." The guard nodded and disappeared. A few minutes later, I saw them, Linda and Robert Thatcher, standing uncertainly at the edge of the reception, looking around at the 100+ people who were celebrating their daughter's wedding. Their daughter, who they hadn't spoken to in 3 years. The MC was about to make his announcement. Perfect timing. "Okay, this is the moment. Before the big reveal, I have a question for you. If you were in my shoes, would you have let your biological parents into your wedding?" Type yes or no in the comments. I want to know what you would have done. And if you're dying to see what happens next, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Now let me tell you about the moment everything changed. The MC stepped up to the microphone. The music softened. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The room quieted. Guests turned toward the front. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. "Before we continue the celebration, I'd like to introduce some very special people." I watched my biological parents from across the room. Linda was craning her neck, trying to see. Robert stood behind her, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. They had no idea what was coming. "Please join me in welcoming the parents of the bride." Linda straightened up. I could see her preparing to acknowledge the introduction, to accept the recognition she believed was rightfully hers. "Richard and Eleanor Morrison!" The room erupted in applause. Richard and Eleanor stood from the head table, beaming, waving to the guests. People cheered. Someone whistled. The photographer snapped photos. And across the room, my mother's face went white. I watched it happen in slow motion. The confusion, the disbelief, the moment she realized what those words meant. Richard and Eleanor Morrison, the family who chose Tori and whom Tori chose in return. Linda grabbed Robert's arm. "What did he just say?" Robert looked stunned, speechless. Around them, guests clapped and smiled, completely unaware that the older couple in the back had any connection to the bride at all. To everyone else at this wedding, Richard and Eleanor Morrison were simply what they appeared to be: my parents. Linda's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. She looked at the happy couple accepting congratulations, then at me standing with my husband, and the truth finally settled over her like a cold wave. She had been replaced. Completely. Officially. Legally. And everyone in this room knew it except her. Linda pushed through the crowd before I could stop her. She reached me just as the applause was dying down. Her face was flushed, her eyes wild. Robert trailed behind her, looking like he wanted to disappear. "What is going on?" Linda's voice was a harsh whisper. "Who are those people?" I kept my voice calm, steady. "My legal parents. I was adopted 2 years ago." "You... what?" She actually staggered back a step. "You can't just replace us." I didn't replace you. I looked at her evenly. You abandoned me first. We never abandoned you. You told me not to come home. You chose Victoria. Every time. For 27 years. The guests nearest to us had noticed the confrontation. Conversations died. Heads turned. That's not fair, Linda started. Fair? I felt Marcus move to my side, a solid, reassuring presence. You want to talk about fair? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough on its own. I spent 27 years trying to earn a place in your family. You know what I got? An Instagram photo with no empty chair. A Thanksgiving dinner alone. 3 years of silence. I'm still your mother, Linda's voice cracked. Not legally. I held up my left hand, both rings glinting in the reception lights. Not emotionally. Not anymore. Around us, the room had gone quiet. 100 pairs of eyes watched us. Linda looked around, suddenly aware of the audience. Her cheeks burned red. This is humiliating, she hissed. Then leave. My voice was soft. Final. You showed up uninvited to my wedding. You don't get to be the victim here. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. The daughter who never fought back had finally stopped shrinking. And then, for the first time in my entire life, my father spoke up. Tori. His voice was rough, broken. I'm sorry. I turned to look at him. Really look at him. Robert Thatcher had aged more than 5 years should account for. His hair was grayer, his shoulders slumped, but his eyes were wet with tears. I'd never seen my father cry, not once in 27 years. I'm sorry, he said again. I should have done better. Something cracked inside my chest. Not healing, just recognition of an old wound. I know, Dad. I was a coward. His voice trembled. I always was. I knew how your mother treated you, how Victoria treated you, and I stood there. I let it happen. Linda grabbed his arm. Robert, what are you? He shook her off, kept his eyes on me. You were my daughter. You were my little girl, and I let them make you feel like you didn't matter. A tear rolled down his cheek. I'm so sorry. The words I'd waited 3 decades to hear. And they came too late. I know you're sorry, Dad. My voice was gentle but firm. But sorry doesn't undo the years you stood by and watched. Sorry doesn't give me back my childhood. Sorry doesn't make this okay. I know. He nodded, wiping his eyes. I know it doesn't. Eleanor appeared at my shoulder. She didn't say anything, just placed her hand on my arm. A quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. Linda stared at Eleanor with barely concealed hostility. You, she spat. You're the one who stole my daughter. Eleanor's expression didn't change. I didn't steal anything, Mrs. Thatcher. Then what do you call this? Richard Morrison stepped forward, positioning himself beside his wife. Richard Morrison wasn't a confrontational man. In the years I'd known him, I'd never once heard him raise his voice. But when he spoke now, there was a steel in his tone that silenced everyone. I think it's time for you folks to leave. Linda's jaw dropped. Who are you to tell us? I'm her father. Richard's voice carried across the quiet reception. Legally and in every way that matters. You stole our daughter! Richard shook his head. Calm. Certain. No, ma'am. We didn't steal anything. You gave her away. We just picked up what you threw out. Linda flinched like she'd been slapped. 5 years ago, Richard continued, this young woman was sitting alone in a restaurant on Thanksgiving because her own family told her she wasn't welcome. My wife invited her to our table. We fed her. We talked to her. We treated her like a human being. He stepped closer to Linda, his voice dropping. Do you know what she told us that night? She said she couldn't remember the last time she felt like she mattered to someone. 27 years old, and she couldn't remember ever feeling wanted by her own family. Linda opened her mouth. No sound came out. We didn't steal your daughter. We just showed her what family is supposed to look like. The rest was her choice. He turned to face the gathered crowd. Now, this is my daughter's wedding day. The happiest day of her life. And I won't let anyone, ruin it. He nodded to the security guards, who had been standing discreetly nearby. Please escort these people out. As the guards approached, Richard put his arm around me. Tori is a Morrison now, he said quietly, and Morrisons protect their own. This is what a father sounds like. Before the security guards could lead them away, I held up my hand. Wait. Everyone froze. Linda looked at me with something like hope in her eyes. Maybe she thought I was having second thoughts. Maybe she thought I'd relent. I walked toward my biological parents, stopped an arm's length away. Mom, Dad. The words still felt strange in my mouth when directed at them. I need you to understand something. Linda's chin lifted. What? I don't hate you. Whatever she'd expected me to say, that wasn't it. I don't hate you, I repeated. I've made peace with who you are. You're not villains. You're just people who couldn't love me the way I needed to be loved. People who chose comfort over fairness. People who let one daughter become invisible so the other could shine. Robert was crying again. Linda's face was a mask. But I've also made peace with who I am. I stood straighter. And who I am is someone who deserves to be chosen, not as a backup, not as an afterthought, chosen first. I looked at them both. The parents I'd spent my childhood trying to please, the family I'd shrunk myself to fit into. You didn't choose me, they did. I gestured to the Morrisons. And I choose them. The room was silent. 100 guests watched this moment, and not one of them moved. Linda opened her mouth to speak. I didn't let her. I'm not erasing you from my history. I'm just not giving you a seat at my table anymore. And that's not revenge. That's just the natural consequence of your choices. I nodded to security. Goodbye, Mom, Dad. As they were escorted out, the wedding guests began to applaud. Not for the drama, for me. The rest of the wedding was everything I'd hoped for. We danced, we laughed, we cut the cake while everyone cheered. Marcus twirled me around the dance floor until I was dizzy with joy. For those few hours, I let myself forget about the confrontation and just be happy. But the next morning, my phone started blowing up. Texts from cousins I hadn't heard from in years, messages from aunts and uncles I barely knew. The extended Thatcher family had heard about what happened at the wedding, and they had opinions. How could you do this to your mother? Family is family no matter what. You've broken your father's heart. I deleted them without responding. But then came a text from someone unexpected. My Aunt Patricia, my father's younger sister. Tori, I heard what happened. I want you to know. I'm proud of you. I stared at the screen. I always knew Linda and Victoria treated you wrong. I tried to say something once, and your mother stopped speaking to me for a year. But you deserved better. You always did. My eyes burned. I typed back. Thank you. That means more than you know. On Facebook, Linda posted a long, dramatic status about ungrateful children and modern families who don't understand loyalty. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That evening, I blocked every phone number and social media account connected to the Thatcher family. Not out of anger, out of peace. Marcus found me on the balcony of our honeymoon suite. You okay? I looked out at the vineyard spreading golden in the sunset. Yeah. I leaned into him. I really am. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of people who didn't want to carry me. I was finally free. 2 weeks after the wedding, a handwritten letter arrived at our new address. The return address said Victoria Thatcher Collins. My sister's handwriting, loopy, perfect, exactly like I remembered from birthday cards that always felt more like obligations than affection. I almost threw it away unopened. But something made me sit down at the kitchen table and read it. Dear Tori, I don't know if you'll read this. Honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. But I had to try. Mom told me what happened at your wedding. She's devastated. Dad hasn't been the same since he came home. I think seeing how happy you are without us, broke something in him. I know we haven't always had the best relationship, but you have to understand. Mom and Dad were just trying to keep the peace. I never meant for you to feel excluded. You always made everything so difficult, always asking questions and bringing up old hurts. It was exhausting. I hope one day you'll understand that family is complicated. Maybe when you have your own kids, you'll see why Mom made the choices she made. I'm not asking for an apology. I just wanted you to know that we still love you, even if you've decided we're not good enough for you anymore. Your sister, Victoria. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. Marcus came home to find me at the kitchen table. What's that? Letter from Victoria. What did she say? Nothing new. I stood up and started making dinner. She still doesn't get it. She never will. Does that bother you? I thought about it. Really thought about it. No, I said finally. It's not my job to make her understand. It never was. A year after the wedding, life had settled into something beautiful. Marcus and I bought a house in the suburbs of Boston, a little Cape Cod with a big backyard, just 20 minutes from Richard and Eleanor. Close enough for Sunday dinners, far enough for privacy. I was no longer freelancing. A design agency had hired me as their art director, a job I loved so much it barely felt like work. Marcus was thriving at his architecture firm. We were building a life together, literally and figuratively. And I was pregnant. Eleanor cried when we told her. Richard tried not to cry and failed. Daniel's kids were already arguing about who would be the baby's favorite cousin. One Sunday afternoon, Eleanor and I were setting up the nursery, painting the walls a soft sage green, arranging tiny furniture that seemed impossibly small. Have you thought about names? Eleanor asked, holding up two different mobiles. Emily, I said. If it's a girl, Emily Grace Morrison. Eleanor's eyes welled up. That's beautiful. The Morrison part is non-negotiable. I smiled. I want her to have the name of the family that chose her mother. Eleanor set down the mobiles and pulled me into a hug. You know, she said, when I saw you sitting alone in that restaurant, I had no idea we'd end up here. I just saw someone who needed kindness. You saved my life that night. No, sweetheart. She pulled back, holding my shoulders. You saved yourself. We just showed you it was possible. I looked around the nursery, at the crib we'd picked out together, at the rocking chair Richard had built by hand, at the life I'd created with people who loved me unconditionally. I finally had everything I'd always wanted. I was home. 5 years to the day after I sat alone in Harborview Grill, I sat at the head of a very different table. The Morrison house was chaos, the best kind. Emily, now 6 months old, was being passed from lap to lap like a tiny, drooling treasure. Daniel's kids were playing some complicated card game in the corner. Sarah was arguing with Marcus about the proper way to carve a turkey. Richard was sneaking extra pie when he thought Eleanor wasn't looking. She was. All right, everyone. Eleanor clapped her hands. Before we eat, we need a toast. She raised her glass and looked at me. Tori, would you do the honors? I stood, Emily in my arms, and looked around the table. At the family I'd found, the family that had found me. 5 years ago tonight, I said. I was sitting alone in a restaurant wondering if I'd ever belong anywhere. I thought I was unlovable. I thought there was something wrong with me, that I was too much, too difficult, too dramatic. I paused, feeling Marcus's hand squeeze my knee under the table. Then a stranger named Eleanor Morrison came up to my table and said, "No one should eat alone on this day." And everything changed. Richard wiped his eyes. Eleanor was already crying. So here's my toast. I raised my glass. To family. Not the one we're born into, but the one we build, the one we choose, the one that chooses us back. To family, everyone echoed. Glasses clinked. Emily gurgled. Richard finally got his extra piece of pie, and I looked around at these people, my people, and felt something I'd spent my whole childhood chasing, I belonged. Completely. Unconditionally. For the first time in my life, I was home. After dinner, Marcus and I sat on the back porch with Emily asleep between us in her carrier. The November air was cold, but we were bundled in blankets, watching the stars emerge one by one. Do you ever think about them? Marcus asked quietly. Your bio parents? I considered the question. Sometimes, I admitted. In the middle of the night, mostly. I'll wonder how they're doing, if they've changed, if they ever really understood what they lost. Do you think they have? Changed? I shook my head slowly. People rarely do, not in the ways that matter. Does that make you sad? I looked at Emily, her tiny fist curled near her cheek, her perfect rosebud mouth, her chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. It used to, I said. But not anymore. I spent so many years being sad about a family that didn't want me. I don't have room for that anymore. My life is too full. Marcus wrapped his arm around me. What changed? I did. I leaned into him. I stopped waiting for them to love me the way I needed. I stopped shrinking myself to fit into their version of who I should be, and I started building something new. Through the window, I could see the Morrison family, my family, laughing and talking, clearing plates and wrapping leftovers. Setting boundaries isn't revenge, I said softly. It's survival. It's choosing yourself when no one else will. Marcus kissed my forehead. I'm glad you survived. Me too. Emily stirred, making soft baby sounds. I picked her up and held her close. I'll never make you earn my love, I whispered to her. I promise. You'll never have to wonder if you're wanted. You'll always know. She yawned and fell back asleep. If you're watching this, and you've been the scapegoat of your family, if you've been told you're too much or too sensitive or always causing drama just because you dared to ask to be treated fairly, I want you to know something. It's not you. It never was. You deserve to be chosen. Not as a backup. Not as a last resort. Not as the acceptable sacrifice when someone else's comfort is at stake. Chosen first. Chosen fully. Chosen without conditions. Family isn't blood. Family isn't obligation. Family isn't people who share your DNA but treat you like a burden. Family is the people who show up. The people who see you crying alone at a restaurant table and invite you to join them. The people who open their Sunday dinners and their hearts and their legal documents to make you officially, permanently, undeniably theirs. I spent 27 years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. And then I spent 5 years learning what love actually looks like. Not from the family I was born into, but from the family that chose me. If the people who are supposed to love you can't do that, if they've proven over and over again that you'll always come last, you have the right to build your own family. You have the right to walk away. You have the right to be happy. That's not revenge. That's not drama. That's just living your life without people who don't deserve a seat at your table. I found my people. And I hope, with all my heart, that you find yours too. You deserve it. Thank you so much for being here until the very end. If my story touched you in any way, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. It really helps more people find these stories. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with your own family? Share your experience in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, check the description. I've linked some of my favorites there. Until next time, remember, you deserve to be chosen.